For the next about, I don't know how many sessions, to be honest. Starting from today, it may be for another 4 months, 5 months, or even 6 months, depending upon your interest and what you want to cover. I'm going to focus on this one particular theme of what I would call as spirituality and coaching, which goes far beyond spirituality in many senses. It's primarily to do, as far as coaching is concerned, in terms of presence, awareness, and stuff like that, use of self. And whatever else that some of you would like to be covered, please feel free and let me know. If I'm knowledgeable about that subject, I can talk about it, or others who are more knowledgeable about this than I am can cover the subject. That's perfectly fine. I would really like it to be a collaborative effort. It's something new that I would like to try out. So today what I plan to do, okay, let me first outline, as I'm looking at it now, and it's completely flowing, whatever happens, I have absolutely no idea. Today we would generally talk about use of self. What does that mean as far as coaching is concerned? And why would that be in what I would call as spiritual? And from there, we would move on to some concepts of, in the next session, the East meeting the West. What does it exactly mean? Many people have asked me, okay, you guys talk about the East meeting the West, what does it mean? Which is about the Eastern spiritual concepts, the holistic concepts, philosophy. How does that sort of resonate with Western psychology, for example, Jungian, neurobiology, quantum physics, and stuff like that. And moving from there a little bit deeper into the states of awareness, especially in the Eastern philosophies of both the Upanishads and the Zen, and probably in another session, much deeper into concepts of yoga and Zen. And some people had talked about, would I be talking about chakras? Certainly, if there is an interest, I would talk about it. It's a popular subject in the United States, at least. And somebody's, I think, Srikanth, I don't know whether it's coming from yours or somebody else. So if you could mute yourself, especially those of you who are on the panel. Yeah, thanks. And then moving from there, there are two subjects that I would really like to cover, which it's work in progress as far as I'm concerned. One is about a concept called create your future. More and more, what I find is that there are a lot of people at a very young age today, they have reached what they have wanted to reach, be it in terms of power or wealth, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction. At the same time, it is not very clear as to what would satisfy them, what will fulfill them. I have a term for this called the confused generation. And so the create your future was, in a sense, a concept that I created to figure out, is there some way such people can be helped? Because I was exactly one many years ago. And as a part of this, intertwining all that is a concept of meditation and practice of meditation. So time permitting, I may need to close about a couple of minutes to 3 minutes early because I have another call starting at 10 o'clock. But this is something that I would certainly do, whatever time it takes, wherever it is necessary. So let me stop with that. And today, there are two things that I really wanted to cover. One is to explain a little bit about why I am talking about this. Why is it relevant? Why has it been relevant to me? And why I feel that it's perhaps relevant to many of you, based on my own personal knowledge of people, as well as people that I come across in many countries today, whether it's in India or the United States or wherever. And the second is the concept of what is called use of self. The use of self is not something which is that well known in the ICF competency of coaching. The self-reflective part of it and expanding oneself to cover others is far more powerful in OD, in Gestalt, and things like that. So I would like to try and relate that, because any of you who's eventually planning to go into the mastery level or has been through the mastery level, you would realize that one of the most important aspects of gaining mastery in coaching or any subject for that matter is that use of self. How do you project yourself? How do you become aware of what you're doing? And what does that mean? So let me start with that. And what I would request you to do is I'll keep the chat window open. If at any point in time you have any questions, please completely feel free to raise your hand. I will promote you to the panel. You can ask a question. And yeah, but it would need that you raise your hands, not just a chat, because I may not be able to sort of all the time watch what is going on in the chat box. Somebody asked, are chakras used during coaching process in India too? I have no idea, to be honest. I do to some extent when I work with some clients who are interested or who would be willing to work with meditation. And so my basic meditation process is based on the chakra meditation. And also the reason is, which we will cover in much greater depth, is that the chakras are about the emotional energy. And so there's a lot of stuff that can be covered through the chakra approach, which is much deeper than emotional and somatic. It's about the energy itself. You are able to get into the being state and address these emotions. So it's a fairly complex subject. It's not easy. And in some ways, dealing with the chakras could be a bit of a razor's edge. It's not something that I would recommend to all of you to go deeper into it from a tantric point of view. But what I'm going to work with you on, or if you're interested, talk about and help you practice a little bit, is a very, very simple, in a sense, attenuated kind of chakra meditation process. So these are mainly those of you who are familiar with yoga. Some of you may be familiar with the chakra aspect as well. Chakras are not normally associated with plain vanilla yoga. It's more part of the tantric process. Okay, at this point in time, I'm also promoting Priya. Okay. So you're all on the panel. Anybody else who wants to at any point in time come in and speak, please do raise your hand. Okay, now, why am I talking about this? The way it started, in a sense, was that, I'm sorry, there's some. Early in my life, pretty much everything went my way, in a sense. In terms of whatever I needed to achieve, I was able to achieve, be it academically, be it in my corporate career, and so on. When I was in my mid-30s, all that I could, or even from earlier, all that I really wanted and I was aiming for were just two things. One was wealth and the other was power. And around the time that I was 35, and I wasn't even aware of it, and the more of power and more of wealth, the more there was a need, there was greed. Around the time when I was 35, and this is all actually I've written about it, blogged about it, so it's nothing very secretive about it. So I'm quite, it's not that I'm very deliberately being vulnerable or whatever, but it's just that it's part of my life, which is known to many people. There's a book called Passages by a lady called Gail Sheehy that she wrote in the 70s. And in that book, I was very surprised to read that I was pretty much a norm. I wasn't anything special. What she basically said was that in the 20s, most people are very idealistic and people think that they are immortal, they are invincible. And as someone said, when you're 18, if you're not a communist, you don't have a heart. But if you're 28 and you are a communist, then you don't have a head. It's something like that. It's very much driven by ideals and so on. And I think, and I also grew up in the generation of the 70s, the Beatles and the hippies and all the generation, which was sort of influencing many people across the world as well. So I was deeply influenced by many of those kind of things. And many people say that was the beginning of what is called the Age of Enlightenment. If you read Professor David Hawkins or someone, he's written a lot about that aspect of it. And in the 30s, what Gail Sheehy said was that you start feeling that there is an expiry date for yourself. Start putting on a ponch, your hair starts going gray, and you suddenly realize that you're not as invincible, as immortal as you thought you were. And along with that, there is a certain pressure that now that you have an expiry date, that you need to do something, you need to achieve something. And that invariably, she said, leads to a desire for wealth and power in most people. I'm not saying everybody, but most people. Each one of you can look into yourself. If you're honest with yourself, you can admit it, not admit it, it's up to you. And the word that she uses there in her book, I still remember that, she says, everybody wants to be a president. They want to be the president of the country, or they want to be president of a small company, they want to be something. They want to have the corner office, they want to make money. So the closer you get to the end of your 30s, the more obsessed you become on that, at least I was. And to the extent that when I was about the last 30, 38, 39, and I decided that I needed to change my jobs to be able to achieve what I wanted to, the corner office and so on. So at the age of about 39, I became a CEO of a company, the president. And in the next few years, yes, I pretty much achieved whatever my initial set of goals were, that I became pretty much almost $1 millionaire in those days, which was a big deal in India, and the CEO and all that stuff. And then I went abroad, took over, I was a turnaround specialist and put up a company, helped a company to build from a loss-making small outfit, a conglomerate, which had joint ventures across the world in 12 countries. It was a multi-billion-dollar operation. And one fine day in Indonesia where I was working, the economy collapsed, and basically, I mean, I didn't have the position and power and the job that I had. It wasn't worthwhile. So I decided, like what all people who are in such situations do, I became a consultant. So at some point in time, as I went through it, there was a feeling that this is not all real. This is not happening to me. It was like the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross talks about. So initially there is anger, there is denial, there is confusion, there is bargaining, all kinds of stuff. And eventually there was an acceptance that this is part of your life. And at that point in time, I decided that I would take a spiritual journey. And I wanted to be a monk. I didn't have a Ferrari to sell, but I decided that I would go into this path. And for 6 years, that's what I did. And during that process, I learned a lot. I wrote about 30 books. I worked with about more than 10,000 people across the world, healing them, working with them, and all that stuff. But at the end, I found that that journey was in many senses meaningless, because the person that I was following was himself totally opposite of whatever he preached. It was hypocrisy of the highest order. So I got out of it and decided that it's an inner awareness that matters. And so since then, I have been focusing on that. And there, totally accidentally, and I had no idea what coaching was. In fact, the person who suggested coaching to me, I asked absolutely curiously and stupidly, I guess. I said, I don't play cricket, I don't play football. What kind of a coach am I going to be? Then he took trouble to explain to me what executive coaching was. And basically his version of executive coaching, which is what is many parts of the world today, was mentoring, about providing solutions and so on. And he said, oh, you've been a great problem solver, turnaround specialist and all that, you could be a great coach. So that is where the story starts in terms of the use of self. But as I went through the coaching journey, I found that what tremendously attracted me was the fact that as a person, I was never a listener. I never had to. As a corporate animal, as a CEO, as someone who's that power, I only had to tell people, I had to direct people, and I had to drive people out of fear. Whereas as I started on my coaching journey, I found another world existed where it was about inquiring, it was about listening. And for the first time in my life, I seriously started listening. And that made a huge difference to my personal life. In fact, my relationship with my wife and my children changed amazingly, and with many other people. Even today, I'm not a great listener. I really, if I sit in a coach's chair, I am. Outside of it, I'm still not that great a listener. But still, even that change that I have made has been extraordinarily transformational. And the other was that though I had been a meditator, I had been in the spiritual journey, that whole aspect of exploring within in terms of self-reflection was earlier more a ritualistic practice. And this became far more of a powerful internal self-reflection, which created a far greater awareness in terms of who I was, how I was behaving with people. And that had its own phenomenal benefits in terms of what Daniel Goleman calls as emotional intelligence, the ability for me to be able to manage my own emotions. To put it very simply, despite all my spiritual journey and so on, I used to get into huge bursts of anger. And it was only during my coaching journey that I really focused on that and got out of it by working on myself and learning how to diagnose the fact or perceive that I was getting angry before, and to be able to control that anger. So many of these kind of changes happen. And at some point in time, I found that the journey that I was in as a coach, and also from there in terms of training other people to be coaches, that far more powerful a spiritual journey than what I thought I was undertaking as a spiritual journey earlier. It was not the robes of a monk and so on and so forth, pretending to be something which I wasn't. But here, there was something that I was able to align myself to that. And that is where I shift into this whole concept of what is called use of self. If you look at Gestalt, if you look at organizational development concepts, the use of self is fundamentally, it is represented as an intersection of three circles. One is about the self, the other is about the other with whom you are interacting. It may be one or many. And the third is the larger environment. So it's about your interaction, how you as a person, you are able to relate to people with whom you are interacting, as well as the larger system, the larger environment. So the whole of use of self is a combination of these. So any of you, if you wish to ask questions at this stage, if it is anything relevant to what I'm saying, please do. One of the, when I started putting down my thoughts on this, and there are two things that helped me. One was that about 2-3 weeks ago, I went for my first membership meeting with the National Training Laboratory, of which I became a member about a couple of years ago. And I was tremendously fortunate to have gone there and attended them. I was tremendously impressed by the kind of work these people are doing. And there was this person, she's of Chinese descent and she lives in England, and her name is Mia Cheung. She's a professor at Henley and other places in UK. And she spoke, and she's an organization development expert, and she has a lot of background knowledge on Gestalt and so on. And she has written a book, an absolutely brilliant book on OD and practical applications of OD. And one of the things that she talked about was the concept of use of self. And she spoke from her heart, and she had, even then, as she said, she was on remission from cancer. And she said, I don't know how long I have to live, but they told me that I had probably 6 weeks, and now it's been 6 months. And for as long as it is, I'm quite happy going around doing whatever things I do that I love. And the whole power, the presence of that person and awareness of the other person about what she was going through was tremendous. It sort of infected every one of us in terms of uh, her vulnerability at one level, the courage, and how many of us were able to relate to her. And so there was a conversation a little after that in a slightly different context where many people started talking about end of life, and some very positively, some very poignantly, or some very in desperation, and so on and so forth. So there are many aspects once you get into the use of self. What is it that comes up? You don't know. It's like a box of chocolates. It's multiple things that comes up. In a very simple way, let me put it this way. I don't know how many of you are meditators, but if you are a true meditator and if you're honest with yourself, you will find that when you start meditating for the first time or even later, the thoughts that come up within you are the darkest thoughts. They are about various things that you feel guilty about. It could be about sex, it could be about other things, whatever it is that you have done wrong to other people. And these are invariably the thoughts that happen. If anybody tells you otherwise, or if anyone tells me otherwise, I don't believe that, because I've talked to enough number of people who are serious meditators, and this is what every one of us goes through. What it does is to really go to the deepest parts of your awareness, deepest parts of your consciousness, deepest part of your unconscious mind, as Freud and Jung called it. And from there, it dredges up stuff which floats up. And how you process it is, of course, up to you. But if you are able to work on it, if you are able to accept it, this is what happened. And not just the guilt, but accept the fact that when this happened, you did it out of the wisdom that you had at that point in time, and therefore there's no reason to feel guilty. However, you learn from it and say, hey, this is not something that I'm going to do. And probably I'm going to wander a little bit here and there. There's an amazingly powerful healing system from Hawaii, which is called Ho'oponopono. If you aren't familiar with that, just Google the word Ho'oponopono. And there was this psychiatrist, Dr. Hugh, I think his name was. He, at a very young age, was appointed as a psychiatrist in a criminally insane facility, where the reputation, it's Ho'oponopono, Ho'oponopono. There's been, I think, Dr. Hugh something. I'll try and type it up now. If any of you can figure it out, you can. What happened was that this criminally insane facility, the reputation of this facility was that people walked in and they walked out dead. There was no one ever who had been who had gotten out of that place cured or alive. And over the next about 7 or 8 years, I don't remember the exact period of time, people started gradually getting out of that place, cured, fully okay. And over a period of time, I think it took about 10 years or 15, I'm not quite sure, that entire facility closed down because there weren't any more people. There was just about a couple of people who were too old and they died, and practically everybody else. It had something like about 98% of cure rate, and people went out. And then someone was interested. They sort of linked it back into this guy, Dr. Hugh, and then they inquired about what he was doing. And people generally said that this guy never did anything. He actually sat in his office and he pored over records, and he would be staring at their files, their photographs, and so on and so forth. And so people asked him, what is it that you did? And he said, I practiced this technique called Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian healing technique. Basically, the technique was very simply that you made yourself responsible for everything that goes wrong with another person. You take the responsibility for that. And you say that you have done something which probably resulted in another person, irrespective of who that person is, irrespective of whether the person is connected to you or not. It sounds pretty weird. And then there's a sequence. It is that you seek forgiveness from the other person. Mentally, you ask forgiveness from yourself, and then you talk about love and you want to spread that love and so on and so forth. There's a 5-step process. This I came into contact with that with some of you may know him, Leon van der Poel, who was my own trainer when I was doing coaching, and he mentioned this, and I started practicing this as I'm very curious about whatever I read new and try to practice that, and I found it had an amazing impact on me. That whenever I met someone who was having trouble, and I had been trained as a healer and a Reiki master, and I found that thoughts started coming up in terms of how I could have been in some way responsible for this thing that happened across the universe, as it were. So it was extraordinarily powerful use of self in a way that by taking responsibility for what someone else was suffering, and I said I was responsible. I didn't feel guilty about it. All that I said was, forgive me, and let me forgive myself, and let me extend my love, and so on and so forth. And it was an amazing journey for me. There was a lot of things that cleared up within me over a period of time. And that was far more powerful than any spiritual practice that I attempted before. So this was one such, and I'm sure there are many such practices in various parts of the world with various cultures and disciplines, which could potentially lead to something like that. And again, I would like to jump a little bit differently to another subject. So when I was putting down the script for this, not quite as a script, but in terms of what I would like to think about, and I was reflecting myself. And one of the things I looked at was a Freudian model of id, ego, and superego. And I had always assumed that id meant was a short form of identity, for example. And in a sense, that is between id and ego, one is unconscious identity, other is probably the conscious identity, and so on and so forth. But to my surprise, when I looked at it, when I Googled for the etymology of the word id, the word is derived from the German word, which means that, T-H-A-T. And it was completely surprising to me, because that is the origin of all the Hindu philosophical concepts. In the Upanishads, there are a thing called the Mahavakyas, the great statements. There are 5 of them. And all of them are about the word Tat, T-A-T, both in Hinduism and also in Buddhism. It's very similar. That word Tat, T-A-T, just means that. So there is one of the most famous Mahavakyas is called the Tatvamasi. Thou art that, you are that. And that represents, the T-H-A-T represents the ultimate truth. It's a Brahman. It's a ultimate truth that religious speakers, spiritual seekers, they look for. And it was amazing to me. I never realized that Freud, I would have accepted it with Jung, but Freud, that he picked up a word which had a resonance with this word, which was used in the Hindu spirituality as the final goal and where you wish to go. And that in turn, for those of you who are familiar with yoga, is the ultimate state of realization. It's called the samadhi. And the word samadhi, actually, we'll talk about it more in detail later. I'm not going into the actual 8 limbs of the yoga and so on. The word in Sanskrit is basically derived from 2 words, sama, adi. Sama, adi means the same as the source. You're going back to the source. And those of you who are familiar with theory U, Otto Scharmer, and you will find the bottom of the U, which is the highest sense, the highest state of self-awareness, is called the source. And that's what he talks about. And we will also go into greater detail about it. So if you really look at it, there is amazing coherence and resonance between these absolutely seemingly different and in some ways very dissimilar kind of practices and concepts. On the one side, something like a Hawaiian healing technique, another the Upanishad concepts or the Buddhist concepts, and the Freudian psychology, which also Jung worked upon and expanded it. And even today, Otto Scharmer, who is known to be one of the thought leaders in terms of systemic learning and stuff like that. And it's so amazing. It is so much of pattern around it. And so that was the reason why I wanted to start this series. And many of you, if you could also do research parallelly along with me in terms of finding out what is it that we are talking about. So at this point in time, I would like to just stop a minute. And I would like people, I specifically chose some of you people here. Jackie, I met through Magda. Jackie is likely to work with us as an associate in future. We're talking to her. She has some background, though she says that, look, it's very superficial, but whatever it may be in yoga and Eastern spirituality, she has a deep interest in it. Ram Charan was with us. He did his part of his coaching program with us, and we have been in contact, and he has been following a very, very serious spiritual path, and he's working on some Upanishads as to what their applications to coaching are. Shrikant I met very recently, and he said that he had been following various spiritual practices and he wanted to learn more. And he was very knowledgeable about many things that I am working on currently. And Priya is one of our associates and who's also familiar with some of these concepts. So I just would like you, those in the panel or anyone outside as well, to put up your hands if you like. And just ask me some questions before I go a little deeper into the use of self. So those in the panel.
Yeah, hi Ram. I'll ask you something if you like. When I hear about the term use of self, I'm assuming that, you know, because in coaching training we're taught to not really, to kind of minimize our presence and our input from a personal side. My question, I guess, is, I'm assuming this talks about use of the personal self in the coaching context, because as we talk from a spiritual point of view, there, you know, it's very clearly delineated. There are two understandings of self. One being the personal self, the ego, the sense of identity, the history, the time-bound self, and the other being the absolute, which has none of these things. And no identity, but it's the kind of ground of beingness. So I'm curious, you know, your reflections, and I think it'd be an interesting discussion a bit about how you see, when you talk about use of self, to delineate which self we're talking about and how those levels of self interact in the coaching interaction, in the coaching conversation. Okay. Is that clear? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, first of all, let me put it this way. The self in terms of the absolute truth, or as what is called in Sanskrit, the Brahman and so on, is not the self that we are talking about here. Though I do believe that there is a resonance, there is a mirroring that could quite possibly happen. We could get into a state of transcendental or transpersonal awareness, which Sir John Whitmore talks about, Fiona Adamson practices, where you could get into that space as well, which is deeply spiritual. It brings up...
Ram, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we can't really hear you. I'm not sure what happened. So okay. It was fine before.
Okay. Let me put on my... I'm sorry.
Sorry about that, but it's really hard. Yeah, so
no, thanks for pointing out. Am I audible now? Hello.
Nothing's really changed.
Okay. Jackie was nodding her head.
Okay. If others are okay now, then that's fine.
Am I okay, Ram Charan? Yeah. Okay. So Magda, there may be something at your end. Let's yeah. Others also say they can hear me. That's fine. Okay. If you look at the competencies, many of you, I mean, we primarily work through the ICF competencies. The ICF competencies does not make a reference to even the word self anyway. Even the awareness that we talk about as competency 8 is more about creating a client's awareness. Whereas if you look at the EMCC competencies, the first competency, which comes in place of ethics, for example, EMCC doesn't look at ethics as a separate competency. It requires it as a basic understanding, as a mandatory kind of practice. And so the competency that they are talking about as the first competency in terms of importance is called understanding self. And that S is a capital S. And it goes into various definitions. There are about 10 or 15 sub-competencies which are described. And that self is about a coach reflecting about what is happening in a coaching conversation. And not merely reflecting, but also expressing it. I know that there is one way of looking at it where, especially when we are in the early levels of ACC and PCC, I have done it in the past. We are changing the way that we teach today. We used to warn people about not bringing in too much of themselves or bringing anything about themselves into the coaching conversation. In fact, I used to take pride in saying that I should be completely disengaged. And to quite some extent, I think I'm changing that opinion, at least for myself, for two reasons. One, at the mastery level, one of the most important competencies is about, and if you see, for example, just the PCC markers, which is not even applicable to mastery strictly, you will find almost about 50% of the markers, especially in presence and awareness and listening, are about how the coach observes, notices, and shares and invites. The whole concept of partnering is about the ability for the coach as well to be able to share. And that sharing is not necessarily only about what the coach feels about what the client has said, but it could be far more powerful if the coach were to share about what is happening within himself or herself as the client is sharing. It is a most powerful use of self. And it's rather late in the day, after 7 or 8 years of practice, that I've understood this. And I'm glad at least I understood this at this point in time. And what, in a sense, helped me to improve upon it was the fact that I went through a supervisory training, which again is not part of ICF, it's part of EMCC. The whole concept of supervision and so on is much more powerful in Europe than it's in USA, just gaining ground. The most important element of supervision is about the self-reflection of the coach. And some of you in the past have been with me on the supervision webinars, and I used to talk about this 7-8 model of Peter Hawkins. The 6th I of the 7-8 model is about the coach's, the supervisor's awareness or reflections. And it took me a long time to get it. I always interpreted the 6th I as something where I was able to talk about what I was becoming aware about the supervisee, the coach, who was at that point in time my client. But that was wrong. It was about what was coming up in me when that coach was talking about his or her interactions with the client. What created in me? How did I somatically feel? Was I tightening up? Was I loosening up? Was I feeling happy? I was feeling frustrated. How I was empathizing with the supervisee. And so you're right, Ram, that the general concept of the way that we have interpreted this ICF competency is not the right way, in a sense. That, yes, the coach should not be judgmental. There's a very, very clear difference between these two. We are not talking about the coach expressing an opinion about what is being talked about. I'm talking about the right and the wrong of what the client is saying. that is totally inappropriate. That is not acceptable in a coaching conversation. However, and those of you, many of you who've been through the mastery journey with us, Cindy and I, you know that this is something which we have been working on consistently. That the ability of the coach to be able to express in an appropriate manner with vulnerability as to what is being experienced by the coach as the coach is listening to the client is an extraordinarily important competency, which is part of listening, which is part of presence, which is part of awareness, which is part of the creation of trust and intimacy. More than half of all the competencies of coaching come into this use of self. So I would leave it there. If any of you others have any opinion on that, please, I would like to hear.
Yes, Ram, I have something. I have a couple of things, if I may.
Please.
So I went through my training in 1994. I went through the Newfield training, and I did not have the, I learned many distinctions in that training, and I did not have the understanding that we don't bring ourselves to the coaching meeting. In fact, one of the distinctions was the most important thing that we do as a coach is to create a safe space for learning for the coachee. And that also, so we're basically creating this environment of learning and opportunity for the coachee. So yes, we are not injecting our advice, our opinions, and we are sharing through our experiences and what we're picking up. So part of the training included some somatic work. And so, for instance, a very powerful experience I had early in my training, I was in a study group, and I was in a practice session with another coach student. And he was presenting his issue, and I was listening. And I knew that what he was talking about wasn't really the issue. It was on an intellectual level. And so one of the things that we learned in the training was to just, an intervention was to actually sit and hold yourself exactly the way the client is holding him or herself, and feel the feelings that you're feeling. And so when I did that, and I learned to do it pretty quickly, I felt this incredible deep, utter sadness in my heart. And so I said to him, I hear what you're saying, Thierry, and I'm feeling this incredible sadness in my heart. Are you sad? And he just launched into all these tears. And then he started talking about what was really happening. And so it was really a powerful experience for me. And it goes to your point about use of the self. Two other things I want to mention. So it really opened up, and we had a very powerful conversation. So I think what a coach is picking up through yourself, through your own understanding, is very, very powerful. There's a book, I forget the author's name, but she said it's called Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart. And she talks about how it's so common that in executive coaching, or in any coaching really, that the client will look to pull you into their dynamics, like their always way of doing things. And that it's really important as a coach to use yourself as an intervention in that dynamic, and not be pulled into that story. A third comment I want to make, though, is I attended a very, very powerful session by Rhiannon Reese. I'd never heard of her before. And she talks about this idea of what you're picking up on another level beyond what's being said. And she uses the analogy of how what we know from physics is that when you observe a particle, it changes the behavior of the particle. And so she challenges you, what are you changing what impact are you having in your client just by the observer you are, just by your presence and your observer? And that put me into a lot of reflection about times, I think one of the things that we do as a coach, we hold the vision for our clients, who they want to be. We see who they are. We see what's possible. And we hold that powerfully. And sometimes it's been kind of mystical what happens. I've seen. I won't go any further, but I'll just say there have been numerous times that what then shows up for them is really kind of mystical. So that's why I love this topic.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jackie. Yeah. The fact that, with new field ontological coaching and the whole incorporation of somatics and so on, it's really more and more I'm coming to realize that's probably where the mastery of coaching lies. It's not in the verbal gymnastics, but it's really in terms of how you deeply dive within. And as you rightly said, at some points in time, going within and being able to create your own awareness about what is happening around you also protects yourself from being drawn into something which, as you said, could be manipulative or whatever the issue may be. So what I would like to also ask is, Priya, if you could share, you said about the self as an intuition, are absolutely right. And ICF does, in fact, encourage intuition. It's very, very clearly one of the competencies. And as you went through your mastery journey, and we've all had several instances of this kind of stuff happening where we invited you to come up with your own intuition. So can you share a bit of that?
So I relate very strongly to what Ram Charan has started off saying. We don't really, there's not, how do we bring the self into the conversation when we say that really self has no role to play. It's all about the client. So the mastery journey for me has been an eye-opener in how I'm bringing myself into this conversation and how me as a self can be a powerful tool for transformation in a client. And the way I understood it is simply to bring yourself as an observer, a true observer, a neutral observer, to be able to share what you observe, what you notice, what you see, what you hear, what you feel. And these are not sometimes logical. It sometimes comes from a space of intuition. And you just share that with the client. And more often than not, this has been a point of transformation for the client. And that's what I've learned from experience as well as in my mastery journey. So the way I understood self earlier was self as in being judgmental, giving an opinion, giving, telling, and all of that. And that changed witness, who's sharing, noticing, observing, and all of that. So that for me is how I see. I don't know, I'm not very well versed with the Vedas or the Upanishads, but I'm seeing some connect here with the Gita, where we say that this is what we do, but we don't know, we are not connected to the outcome of what happens, right? So as a coach, what we're really doing is observing, sharing, noticing, sharing, but we are not really connected, or we are not bound by what that actually manifests as an outcome for the client. The minute we are connected to that outcome, the minute we hold on to that outcome very strongly, then we are no longer being neutral. We are no longer in a coaching space. We become judgmental. So to that extent, I'm relating it to the Gita, where they say, just focus on your action and not the outcome. So this is how I see a parallel in Eastern as well as some Western thoughts. Having said that, Ram, I would also like to hear from you. Are there any direct parallels, just like the way you shared Freud, Eid, and Tat? Are there any direct parallels that you've seen in your journey between Eastern and Western concepts and philosophies?
Yeah, I think in the next session, I'll go more into those parallels, whether it is the Gita,
Okay.
whether it is so on. That itself is a hugely vast subject. There are many, literally, I mean, there are far more parallels than differences. And that is, in some ways, it's unfortunate that we all focus on the differences between these various cultures and religions and philosophies, but actually the parallels are far greater than those differences. So we will get into that, and probably that will help us look at this more clearly. Gopalji, I just got you into the panel. I wanted to, this particular thing that you talked about, going not knowing and holding the vision for the client. Would you like to expand on what you said, please?
This was a reflection on my own, from my own journey towards mastery with you and Cindy. And I really valued what Jackie referred to as other people's learnings and very contextual. But why I had to speak up is because in my own journey, it was more about suspension of myself. I fully agree with the use of self that is being discussed here. But for me to become a better coach, I had to let go of many parts of my personality, which had happened thanks to my own corporate journey, are somewhat similar to what Ram, you shared, of course. We are a few decades apart, but yeah, in terms of length of time spent in corporate, I had done quite a bit. And so for me, it was about my experiences. And if I brought in my experiences, I also willy-nilly brought in judgments, biases, solutioning, and then hinting, nudging, suggesting the client. All of this I found happening in my practice. And somewhere in the journey from PCC level to MCC level, I had to let all that go. So might sound contradictory, but for me, use of self could begin only when I could suspend myself, if that makes sense. So that's what made me comment on what I heard from Jackie.
Very, very true. And I mean, yeah, essentially what happened to you, that essential shift in the mind, the transformation, if you want to call it, it's a cliche. You have experienced it, Priya has experienced this as you went through the mastery journey, was essentially in some ways, as you call it, it could be the disengaging from the self or involving the self in such a way that it disengages, whichever it is, the creating awareness. The use of self is an extraordinarily powerful concept as well as a practice. Yeah, I just want to bring you in, Maheshwari. You had made a couple of comments earlier about chakras and then later about the OD journey. Okay. Would you like to say something about it? No, you can't hear you for some reason, though you are not muted. I don't know what's wrong. Now you are muted. No, you are muted now.
I believe you would be able to hear me now.
Yeah.
So this completely brought in awareness about being an OD consultant and NLP business coach, that how I'm able to suspend my judgments and bring about the clarity and the vision about my clients. So that is something, a complete reflection journey for me. When you spoke about the chakras and also you spoke about being aware of self. So that
Yeah,
was
absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely.
very true. I mean, we'll get into chakras later, how it helps, how it probably aids the use of self. And thanks a lot. Supriya had made a comment about, isn't it about the suspension of the self? In this particular case, the self is the identity or the ego, and moving into the heart space, the ego is absolutely correct. Ramcharan, the question of sometimes we evaluate to frame the issue of use of self. Would you like to explain it? Because sankalpa to me is basically the intent that you create for yourself. And yes, it is an expression of the use of self, but what exactly do you mean by what you have said?
Well, I guess that the discussion, what it's prompting in me is when we think of using the sense of self or referring to our own experience in a coaching conversation, what's very important is to see where that's coming from. Is it coming from, you know, the small self and its need to be right or its need to have power? Or is it a spontaneous, emergent arising, you know, more like what the ICF calls dancing in the moment, that something comes up and, yeah, the sense of doership and intention can be there in service to the intuition. So where that sankalpa is rooted seems to me to be very important, that it'll carry a different energetic quality the deeper it comes from. And that's kind of what leads to transformational questions, powerful questions, transformational insights in the coachee. That's kind of my thinking around this.
Excellent. What I would like to hold is both you and what Gopalji has said here. Presence is absence, absolutely. The whole concept of presence is about the absence of the ego. And that is what is presence about. So unfortunately, I need to run at this point in time. I have a commitment in another couple of minutes. So we will take this forward, and it's been excellent. And this is a kind of interaction that we should have. And I would like to have all of you share in this. And pardon me for terminating the conversation at this point in time. It was really getting interesting. So I hope to see all of you next month on the second Wednesday when we are getting together. Good night, wherever you are. From the Indian timing, it's a good night. Thank you. Bye. Take care.